My mother tells me that by 5 years old, I had decided definitively to become a concert pianist. I think she had decided some time earlier. The story goes that while I was in the womb, she played the piano continuously to give me a head start, and evidently it paid off. My mother was my first teacher, and I've never doubted her methods. After all, she introduced me to Bach.
Oh, good. Try another.
By the age of 10, I had the first book of the Well-Tempered Clavier pretty much under my belt.
Good. Oh, that's very good. Very good. Let's try one up at this end here.
My childhood was full of music, even at our cottage on Lake Simcoe. Those days seem particularly idyllic to me, at least in retrospect.
Go ahead.
They certainly were compared to my school days. At an early age, I could read music and memorize it on the spot. In fact, I could read music before I could read words. I remember I used to play a game with my mother where I would identify the chords she played from the other side of the house. People always seem to make a great deal out of these early signs, but they hardly constitute miracles, in my opinion. I simply have a facility with a certain kind of minutiae. I always have.
7 times 26 equals 2,262. 87 times 8. 87 times 27 equals 2,340. 87 times 28 equals 2,460.
I often think how fortunate I was to have been brought up in an environment where music was always present. Who knows what would have become of me otherwise? It's a question I often ask myself. But I've yet to come up with an answer.
Je l'ai vu après tout, la première fois dans un hôtel à Toronto, lorsqu'on s'est rencontrés pour la première fois, après de multiples palabre, au téléphone ou par lettre pour prendre notre premier rendez-vous. Je l'ai rencontré, il faisait 30 degrés à l'extérieur, il faisait vraiment très chaud. Il était en manteau, il avait ses casquettes, des écharpes, des gants, enfin tout un accoutrement qui semblait extravagant et qui en réalité correspondait exactement à la protection dont il avait besoin vis-à-vis du monde extérieur pour se protéger de ce qui, en fait, il est mort, des problèmes de germination, des problèmes de tension sanguine. Donc, bien entendu, si vous voulez, la première vision qu'on pouvait avoir de quelqu'un de ce genre était très, très étonnante. On ne pouvait pas être saisi devant quelqu'un avec cet air quasiment clochardesque. Seulement, il entrait dans votre chambre, à l'hôtel, et puis il est resté pendant 18 heures d'affilée. Aucun souci extérieur, aucun souci de la nourriture, quoi que ce soit, ne venait troubler en fait le rapport qu'on était en train d'établir. Et la seconde chose qui vous a frappé, c'était l'humour, c'était l'extraordinaire capacité de s'amuser et de lancer des idées qui étaient stimulantes, à la fois par leur profondeur et par leur drôlerie. Et donc, si vous voulez, cette manière un petit peu bizarre, qui était la première chose que vous saisissiez et qui ne durait que cet instant de la première rencontre. Après, c'était fini. Ça disparaissait très rapidement pour faire place à l'homme réel qu'il était, et qui était, en fait, dans lequel rien chez lui ne cherchait à choquer. C'était simplement lui-même qui cherchait à exprimer.
Mr. Gould, to begin, let me ask straight out, are there any off-limit areas?
I certainly can't think of any, apart from music, of course. Well, Mr. Gould, I don't want to go back on my word. I realize that your participation in this interview was never contractually confirmed, but I had rather assumed that we'd spend the bulk of the interview on music-related matters. Do you think it's essential? I mean, my own personal philosophy of interviewing, and I've done quite a bit of it on the air, as perhaps you know, is that the most illuminating disclosures usually derive from areas only indirectly related to the interviewee's line of work. For example, in the course of preparing radio documentaries, I've interviewed a theologian about technology, a surveyor about William James, and a housewife about acquisitiveness in the art market. But surely you've interviewed musicians about music. Well, yes, I have, on occasion, but only in order to put them at ease in front of the mic. But it's been far more instructive to talk with Leopold Stokowski about the prospect for interplanetary travel, which is, I'm sure you'll agree. Let me put it this way. Is there a subject you particularly like to discuss?
What about native rights in Alaska?
Well, I must confess I had a rather more conventional line of attack, so to speak, in mind, Mr. Gould. As I'm sure you're aware, the virtually obligatory question in regard to your career is the controversy you created by giving up live concert performance at the age of 32 and choosing to communicate only through the media. I do feel we must at least touch on it.
As far as I'm concerned, it primarily involves moral rather than musical considerations. In any case, be my guest.
Now, you've been quoted as saying that your involvement with recording, with media in general, indeed, represents the future.
That's correct.
And that conversely, the concert hall, the recital stage, the opera house, or whatever represent the past, an aspect of your own past in particular, perhaps, as well as in more general terms, music's past.
That's true.
I hope you'll forgive me for saying that these ideas are only partly justified. Also, I feel that you, Mr. Gould, have foregone the privilege that is rightfully yours of communicating with an audience.
From a power base?
From a setting in which the naked fact of your humanity is unedited and unadorned.
Couldn't I at least be allowed to display the tuxedoed fallacy, perhaps?
Please, Mr. Gould, I don't feel we should allow this conversation to degenerate. I've tried to pose the question in all candor, and...
Well then, I'll try and answer likewise. To me, the ideal audience-to-artist relationship is a 1-to-0 relationship. That's where the moral objection comes in.
Run that by me again?
First, I'm not at all happy with words like public and artist. I'm not happy with the hierarchical implications of that kind of terminology. The artist should be granted anonymity. He should be permitted to operate in secret, as it were, unconcerned with, or better still, unaware of the presumed demands of the marketplace, which demands, given sufficient indifference on the part of a sufficient number of artists, will simply disappear. Given that disappearance, the artist will then abandon his false sense of public responsibility, and his audience, or public, will relinquish its role of servile dependency.
And never the twain shall meet.
No, they'll make contact, but on a much more meaningful level.
Well, Mr. Gould, I'm well aware that this sort of idealistic role swapping has a certain rhetorical flourish. The creative audience concept, to which you've devoted a lot of interview space elsewhere, has a kind of McLuhan-esque fascination, but yet you conveniently forget that the artist, however hermetic his lifestyle, is still, in effect, an autocratic figure. He's still, however benevolently, a social dictator. And his public, however generously enfranchised by electronic options, is still on the receiving end of the experience. And all your neo-medieval anonymity quest on behalf of the artist as zero, and all your vertical pan-culturalism on behalf of his public, isn't going to change that.
May I speak now?
Of course, I didn't mean to get carried away, but I do feel strongly about
the artist as Superman?
That's not quite fair, Mr. Gould.
Or about the interlocutor as controller of conversation, perhaps?
There's no need to be rude.
What about this? If you imagine that the artist is to be...
Yes, that's right. Toronto. Toronto, Canada. It should read as follows. Dear Walter, stop. Under the weather yesterday. Stop. X-rays reveal chronic bronchitis. Bronchitis in right lung. Stop. Feeling as foggy as it is outside. Stop. Comfort from dubious doctor. Stop. He would suit you perfectly. Stop. Concerts tomorrow and Monday canceled. Stop. Cannot and will not leave this room. Stop. End.
Oh, sir, I'm sorry to disturb, but we have a picture.
New York?
Yes, sir.
Yes?
At last, excellent, thank you.
Duncan. Yes, that would be it indeed. Could you read that back to me, please? Wait, please stay. No, concerts tomorrow and Monday canceled, of course, not can't sell. That means something entirely different.
Aber mein Herr, Entschuldigung, ich muss arbeiten.
No. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yes. Al, that's absolutely flawless. Could you send it off immediately, please? Room 318. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Salzburg to Stockholm, Berlin, Wiesbaden, Florence, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and on the whole tour, I'd say there were maybe 6 good hotel rooms, 5 comfortable beds, and at least 3 adequate pianos. Some of these pianos were so hopelessly unwieldy, I decided it was best just to ignore them. It required a kind of mystical transcendence to get me through. I have no idea what the audience resorted to. I'm not one of those piano freaks, you know. Of course, I'm aware there are people who would gladly sit in the most uncomfortable chair with 3,000 other people in uncomfortable chairs and listen to hours and hours of the stuff, but it's nothing I would ever subject myself to. I just don't like the sound of piano music that much.
5 minutes, Mr. Gould. Yeah, you can tell him to close the doors now. Yeah, I think he's ready now. I told you, go ahead. Yeah, here we come. This way, Mr. Gould.
Glenn, I didn't want to bother you now, but I'm not going to be here after this show. Gary's going to be here. Don't think about it. The guy with the short, you know, he's going to pick you up. Oh, and there is a reception after. Yeah, I know it's going to be squares for a man, but it would make a couple of gray-haired ladies really happy if we just walked through it one time, you know? Oh, and I did want to show you a schedule for tomorrow. No, don't bother with it. Don't bother with it now. Don't even think about it, but if you do have a moment after you want to change anything.
Sure, it's fine.
You want to see more of L.A.? I'm going to leave it on your dresser.
I think we should take the stairs.
Maybe we should.
Don't even think about it now.
It's a long way.
Certainly is. If it weren't for you, I'd have been dropping breadcrumbs along the way.
Yes, we just arrived. Yes, he's there. Okay.
Mr. Gould?
Of course.
My wife has all of your records.
Well, tell your wife that she has exceptional taste. Also, she's very lucky. I'm never going to sign one of these again. How long have you worked for this theater?
It's been almost 30 years.
30 years? You must be near retirement, if you don't mind my asking.
No, at the end of the season.
What will you do after that?
Well, I have my garden.
Yes?
I'm going to build an arboretum. You know what that is?
Yes, I think so.
Mr. Gould?
My best to your wife and garden.
Thank you.
What did he say? What did he write?
April 10th, 1964. Best of luck in your new career, Glenn Gould. The final concert.
Oui. Je crois que comme toute personne essaie de justifier leur position, font ce qu'ils veulent faire de toute façon, mais veulent encore justifier d'une façon universelle, lui aussi est tombé dans ce piège où il exagérait un peu la moralité de sa décision. Évidemment, il avait, d'un certain point de vue, raison. Dans un public, il y a ceux qui entendent mieux, ceux qui entendent moins bien, ceux qui voient mieux, ceux qui voient moins bien. Quelquefois, il y a un public dans les grandes églises qui sont assis derrière des piliers, qui ne voient rien. L'acoustique, quelquefois, est exagérée, où on entend quelque chose de trop ou de trop peu, où le volume est trop grand, où la réverbération fait mal aux oreilles. Il a raison, ce n'est pas toujours idéal. Mais ça fait partie de la vie. Pour moi, ça existe comme élément vivant. La vie de Glenn Gould, je trouverais presque personnellement trop artificielle pour moi. Mais comme je dis, c'est parce que je ne suis pas de sa taille du point de vue créateur. Je ne peux pas me faire une vie tout seul, à l'exclusivité, excluant tout le reste du monde et ne concentrant que sur cet exercice intellectuel et physique et essayant d'échapper à tous les courants d'air, protégé par un foulard, ne pouvant pas supporter que quelqu'un me touche à l'épaule. Et en même temps, il adorait aller dans les villages des pêcheurs, dans les grandes... dans les distances qu'offre le Canada. Ça, il aimait. La nature, il aimait. Les hommes naturels, il les aimait. Il aimait le pêcheur beaucoup plus qu'un public à New York.
Glenn, we're ready for playback. Yeah. I'm going to give it to you without EQing, okay? And all the levels are flat. Ready in 3, 2, 1.
Coffee?
Yes, yes.
Shouldn't be giving this to you, you know. It's not very good for you.
You mean coffee in general or your coffee?
No, coffee and cream as a combination. It's very bad for you. It's dangerous.
Where did you get this?
It just sits in your stomach like asphalt. I read it in a magazine.
The coffee from that machine's going to kill me anyway, so, you know, a little cream. You're one to talk. I mean, look at you, you're falling apart there now. He could use some coffee.
Sugar, on the other hand, is actually a very good combination. It actually helps the coffee do what it's supposed to do. So, the Italian concerto.
This is really good. I really think we have something here. Glenn, how was that?
I think there's something in that. Let's hear it again.
I became Glenn Gould's chambermaid because the other chambermaids, who were mostly middle-aged Italian and Jamaican women, were terrified of him. They thought he was strange, probably some sort of sexual deviant. They just found him peculiar because he was very eccentric.
When we were in Moscow in 1957, we stayed at the Canadian Embassy. And after the first concert, we went back into our limousine, which had been loaned to us by the embassy. And at the end of the concert, Glenn had received a tremendous number of flowers and big pots of mums and other flowers. And as we got into the limousine and sat down, all the flowers had been piled up there, and we had barely room to sit there. And Glenn said to me, "You know, Walter, it feels like we are driving to our own funeral at this point."
This was his passion. He really wanted to start, retire away to Manitoulin Island, to buy a big hunk of it, and bring every unwanted animal in the world there.
And there were numerous boxes. I think one time I counted a dozen boxes of arrowroot cookies sort of scattered about the room. And there were also numerous bottles of ketchup.
It was a very penetrating interview. The most intelligent questions I think I'd ever heard about the North from experts, laymen, or anything else. Questions that required rather long answers. And as I would start to speak or make a point, he would register his feelings not by voice but by a smile. But all the time, he was using his hands and conducting. And this was perhaps slightly off-putting when we were trying to think deep thoughts, but because I had no idea what this was all about. But he continuously was just waving his arm and then sort of bring up this idea and so on. I was his orchestra for that hour.
So he decided to wear this business suit, and I discussed it with him, and I said, "You know, Glenn, I'm not sure that the public will understand what you're trying to convey, but if you want to do it, go ahead." Which he did, and he was probably the first artist that went out on stage without what was considered then the proper concert attire, but he again was in the forefront of change.
He used to wake up at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and to get himself awake, he used to phone people. And I was one of those people that he phoned. And he'd talk about anything, he just wanted a listening board.
One night he called, and he was babbling on. And it was probably about 1 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And I fell asleep. As a matter of fact, before I fell asleep, I had stretched out on the rug, and I had the phone there because I'd been sitting in a chair, and I got tired of sitting in the chair. I stretched out, and he was talking, and I wasn't talking at all. And I fell asleep. And the next thing I knew, my son had walked into the room, and he was kicking me on the soles of my feet. And he said, "Wake up, there's somebody on the phone." And it was Glenn, and he was talking away, and I don't know how long I had been sleeping, but I didn't even remember the sequence. The words were just pouring out.
The phone rang, and as I picked it up, it was Glenn Gould on the other end, and he said, "Hi, this is Glenn Gould, and I feel like talking."
"Mario," he said, "I've come across the most marvelous opera for your program." I said, "What is it?" He says, "You know Ernst Krenek?" I said, "Yes, certainly." He said, "I've got this marvelous opera by him." He said, "Wait, I've got the score here. I'll sing it to you." So he sang this entire one-act opera, one-act, two-scene opera over the telephone in his not very pleasant voice.
He was very much involved with himself. He didn't think of what others had to do or their responsibilities. He was consumed with what he was doing and his own things.
His will was that he left half of his estate to the SPCA, Society for the Prevention of Cruelties to Animals, and the other half to the Salvation Army.
Yes, getting 318 back from Ottawa to tune for the conservatory, when I was phoned up about it, I thought, should I do this? I thought, no, I'm going to do it just for old time's sake. And when I got working on 318 again and cleaned it up and tuned it and worked on the action a bit, it felt good. So I guess I'd miss him. I missed his intelligent comments, and I missed listening to his 20 questions, not particularly to me, but he was, I'll tell you one thing. Today I had a customer phone me up and say, can you come tomorrow to tune my piano? Glenn Gould used to give me 2 or 3 months' notice, and I respected that. And I'm very thankful for knowing him.
When you're alone and life is making you lonely, you can always go downtown. When you've got worries, all the noise and the hurry seems to help, I know. Downtown, just listen to the music of the traffic in the city. Linger on the sidewalk where the neon signs are pretty. How can you...
Hello, Mr. Gould. Tu as at the usual?
Yes, if you'd be so kind.
Yeah, I agree. For instance, one time up by the reptile house, you know where that is, up near Prairie Sound, I see this hippie type thumbing a ride. Long hair up to here. I figured I'd pick him up anyway, keep me entertained for a while, because I'm going all night. Keep me awake. Only when I picked him up, it turns out it wasn't a hippie at all. It was a girl, a young girl. And I mean pretty like you never seen. So I says to her, what the hell are you doing out here all by yourself, eh? And 100 miles down the road, I got her whole life story. Seems like she had a fight with her boyfriend. They broke up. Then she had a fight with her parents and decided to run away from home.
Janet?
Generation gap or whatever the hell it was.
Janet, viens t'asseoir. C'est que c'est pas le moment, mais faut que je te parle.
100 miles later, she's curled up next to me.
Ils vont changer ma route, je
sleeping
passerai
like a
plus
little
par
baby,
Toronto.
cried herself to sleep.
Je passerai plus par ici.
I looked down at this sweet little 16-year-old thing.
3 ans sur la même route, c'est quand même pas pire.
You know what I did? I turned my rig around.
Tu sais combien de fois je suis venu
and
ici?
I took her straight home.
Je les ai comptés.
Right to her house, right
Avec
to the front
aujourd'hui, ça
door.
fait 156 fois.
Should have seen the look on her parents' face.
$50, pal. 5 Au revoir.
They screwed us, man. Damn
Big
Imlach.
18-wheeler rig goes up there, you know?
Ullman,
Pulls up.
Henderson, Ellis.
Who
Who
needs
needs
to
them?
come out?
If we still had Maharaj.
Yeah, but you don't. You see,
Because that's over.
there's a code that I live by. as a
Montreal is going to take it this year. You want to put money on that?
That's over. I
For
gotta
a
go.
strict code of ethics. I
That's over.
believe in
I
it.
gotta go.
So come on, rack them up. You rack 'em up.
Practice it.
It's over.
I rack. Okay.
And
$10.
I-
Get it out.
I never regret it. Not a minute. Never. No, sir.
Okay, Glenn, I'm ready to start. I'll give you the whole thing from the top, and when we get you, I'll just hit the record button and you can start. Are you all set? Here we go. Stand by. Ready? Here we go. 3, 2.
I was fascinated by the country as such. I flew north from Churchill to Coral Harbour on Southampton Island at the end of September. Snow had begun to fall, and the country was partially covered by it. Some of the lakes were frozen around the edges, but towards the center of the lake you could still see the clear water. And flying over this country, you could look down and see various shades of green in the water, and you could see the bottom of the lakes, and it was a most fascinating experience. I remember I was up in the cockpit with the pilot, and I was forever looking out, left and right, and I could see ice floes over the Hudson's Bay, and I was always looking for a polar bear or some seals that I could spot, but unfortunately there were none. And as we flew along the east coast of Hudson's Bay, this flat
I don't go, let me say
country
this again, I don't
frightened
go
me a
for this
little,
northmanship bit at all.
because it just seemed endless.
I don't.
We seemed to be going into nowhere.
Not those people who do claim that
And
they
the
want to
further
go
north
farther
we
and
went,
farther north and so
the more
on.
monotonous
But I
it
see it as a kind of a game, this northmanship bit, with people
snow
saying, well,
and
you
to
know,
our
were you
right,
ever up at the North Pole? You know, and how long I did a
No, this was
dog
my
sled
first
trip
year
of
in
22 days, and the other fellow was like, well, I did one of 30
And
days.
then
No,
for
it's
another
very
11
childish.
years.
Perhaps they
I
see
served
them,
the North
they
in various
would
capacities.
see themselves as more.
Sure, the North has changed my life. I can't conceive of anyone being in close touch with the North, whether he lived there all the time or simply traveled it month after month and year after year. I can't conceive of such a person being really untouched by the North for the rest of his life.
The mass media.
When I left in 1965, at least left the job
It goes
there,
on like this, as though there's some special
it wasn't because of being tired
merit,
of the
some
North,
virtue
of
to
feeling
being
it
in
had
the
no
North,
more
or
interest anything of
some
the
special
sort. I was
virtue
as keen as ever.
in
I
having
left
been with
because I
the
am a
primitive
public
people.
servant. I was
Well,
asked to
you
do
know, what
another
special
job
virtue was
which
there
was
in that?
related
And
to
It is most
fighting the
difficult
war
to
against
describe.
I
poverty,
find
and I
it-
suppose the
It was
main reason
extreme
I left
isolation.
is because
I think I'd be
the
more
This is very
interested in
true.
Baker Lake.
that I had
And I
got
knew
right
very
now
well
than
I could
fighting
not go
some of the
anywhere
worst
except
kind
for
of
a mile or two
if indeed
walking.
it
ever
is
experienced.
changing.
I always think of the long summer
trouble is when
nights
you
when
go
the
north,
snow had
it's
melted,
changing.
the lakes were open,
A one-time
and the geese
tourist,
and ducks had started to
More
fly
or
interested in
even
home.
that
if you
than I
go
think I
off
would be in going
During
to
that
for a
time, the
year or
sun
two,
would set,
you
but
start
when there
thinking
was
of any
still
place
the
left
last
mental
shimmer in the
synapses
sky,
Shelley Bay and everything.
I would walk out to one of those
never
lakes
see the
Still,
North as a
and
kind
watch
of
those
market,
ducks and geese
You
just
don't
fly
realize
around
quite how it's
peacefully
changed.
or
It's
sitting
fallen
on
to
the
that
water.
level
the way of technological.
of thinking,
And I
ha-ha,
felt
here
that
the
I was
North
almost
opened
part of
up.
that
It opened
country,
up the day before yesterday.
part
That's
of that
taking a
peaceful
stand
surrounding,
that the world outside
and I
And,
wished that it would never
there it all
end.
is suddenly. Are we right to open it
the mass
up?
media, which
This was
incidentally
the real
especially
truth about
true
the
for
North
me
is
as a
very
nurse,
far
because of the
north.
fact that whenever I spoke
This is Glenn Gould, and this program is called The Idea of North.
Let's talk about the radio documentaries you made for the CBC. Two of your programs, The Idea of North and The Latecomers, are both about the idea of solitude as it affects people living in northern Canada.
In fact, all of those programs deal to some degree with solitude. There are 5 programs I've made that have taken 300 or 400 hours of studio time. Number 1 was, as you mentioned, The Idea of North. 2 was Latecomers. 3 was Stokowski. 4 is one we're just mixing now on Casals, a portrait for radio. I'm doing one next year on Schoenberg, and there's one that's laying around now for a year and a half. It's a program about the Mennonites called Quiet in the Land, and that's the ultimate in community isolation. So next, I want to do a comedy about an isolated man because I'm sick and tired of all these profound statements.
Well, radio itself is a solitary experience. Why does it interest you as a medium?
I'd like to deal with this as sensibly as I can. It's a big question. It's an important question. I don't know what the effective ratio would be, but I've always had a sort of intuition that for every hour you spend with other human beings, you need X number of hours alone. Now, what that X represents, I don't really know, whether it be 2 7/8 or 7 2/8, but it's a substantial ratio. Radio's something that's always been very close to me ever since I was a child, something I listen to virtually non-stop. I mean, it's wallpaper for me. I sleep with the radio on. In fact, now I'm incapable of sleeping without the radio on ever since I gave up Nembutal.
Does it affect your dreams?
Sure, insofar as if there are broadcasts on the hour, I will pick up the bulletins and dream them, and in the morning, if there's a boat that's just gone down, I'll think, gee, that was an odd dream about the Titanic I had last night, and I will have, of course, gone through it.
Maybe your feelings about solitude come from your Nordic temperament.
I think that's certainly part of it. It's always been an ambition of mine, which I'll probably never get around to realizing, to spend at least one winter north of the Arctic Circle. Anyone can go there in the summer when the sun is up, but I want to go there when the sun is down. I really do. And so help me, I'm going to do it one of these times. I've been saying this for 5 or 6 years now, and every year the schedule gets in the way.
Well, I hope you do. Thank you very much, Mr. Gould.
Mr. Gould, thank you for the interview yesterday. I would just like some further clarification, if I may. It's good. Where am I? Okay, here we are. Now, if it's really true that you attach little importance to the actual technique of playing the piano, how is it that you have managed to attain such a level of skill in it? Well, that is to say, don't you think it's depressing for all the young pianists of the world to know this?
Glenn Gould, Glenn Gould, Glenn Gould. Glenn Gould, I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for arranging for me to have this chance to interview you finally. And before we begin the interview, I also want to give you a great big thank you on behalf of all of our readers.
Well, these are tough questions. They're going to come up. People are going to watch the play, and they're going to ask me. Glenn Gould is apparently incredibly interested in technology, but really wasn't technology just a reason or a way for him to keep the world at arm's length? It's just a big smokescreen, isn't it?
Let me ask you this. What is Glenn Gould really like when he's not in the studio? I mean, what do you like to do when you're outside of a recording booth? What kind of lifestyle do you lead?
Mr. Gould, you are a perfectionist when it comes to recording. So why is it that when you are recording, you place little importance on whether you have a piano with noisy works or a chair that squeaks? Why, when you seem obsessed with this idea of musical perfection, do you hum as you play?
I forgot the question. I mean, what aspect of your life has nothing to do with anything that has to do with classical, musical music?
Years ago, you said that you were going to leave a public performance because you want to compose. And we've waited, and the years have passed, and there's no body of work, I mean, musically speaking. And people are waiting, and how do you feel about all that?
Would you teach me piano?
What about children? I mean, have you thought about that? What do you look for in a woman? Or maybe I should just say, what are you waiting for?
One more question, if I may, out of curiosity. Why do you insist on conducting interviews by phone?
Monsieur Gould, vous avez affirmé qu'il y a dans notre culture des forces économiques et sociales qui sont à l'œuvre et qui ont déjà rendu caduques les salles de concert. Vous anticipiez d'ailleurs la disparition de ces salles autour de l'an 2000. En quoi cet énoncé permet-il de jeter un nouveau regard sur la mécanique et l'économie du marché musical et sur l'asservissement de l'artiste à ce système?
Oh, caduc.
I know. You left the concert platform. It's been talked about, it's been explained, all the reasons, but I mean, think about it. On the day that it happened, it was about fear, wasn't it?
Enfin, alors que vous concevez ce nouvel ordre culturel comme un affranchissement de l'artiste, il apparaît plutôt de mon point de vue que cette vision encourage une techno-hégémonie et l'exploitation de l'artiste par des mégastructures capitalistes, non?
I've asked you about your music, I've asked you about your family, I've asked you about your children, I've asked you what you have for dinner, I've asked you what you do when you go to a movie.
Mr. Gould, you've stated that the concert hall is becoming more and more of an economic liability, but that you foresee this problem rectifying itself by the year 2000. Why?
Okay, fine. Are you homosexual?
Why didn't you answer my calls? Why did you stop calling me?
You know, I am deeply in love with a certain beautiful girl. I asked her to marry me, but she turned me down, but I still love her more than anything in the world. And every minute I can spend with her is pure heaven. But I don't want to be a bore, and if I could only get her to tell me when I could see her, it would help. She has a standing invitation to let me take her anywhere she'd like to go anytime, but it seems to me she never has time for me. Please, if you see her, ask her to let me know when I can see her and when I can.
Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani arrived in Ottawa today to begin a series of discussions across Canada about the future of oil pricing. The powerful Saudi oil minister...
Howie, thanks for holding. It's me, your fairy godmother. You just cleared 30 grand in your sleep, buddy.
Well, Falson, Texas Gulf at 46. Call me, let me know how the options open. Sorry, sir. What's on the recommender? Play it safe. I'm sticking with the big one. Oil, that is. Black gold, Texas tea.
Across the board. Gulf Dome, Petrofina. Take your pick and hold on for the ride. We're going through the roof here. Looking at 32 by the bell. Okay. Sotex Resources? No, never heard of it. Yeah, I'll check the charts. Yeah, but again, I'm telling you, look, oil right now is as close to a sure thing as we got in this business. It's crazy to sell. Sotex. Nope, got nothing on it. Sounds risky to me. Hey, you want it, you got it. Yeah, I'll just ask you to remember in the days and weeks ahead, this was your bright idea. It's my job. Later.
Piano player?
Yeah, Glenn Gould, the piano player. Okay, got it by for you. 10,000 STX, Gould.
What's the special of the day?
Canstar Oil and Gas.
11 3/4.
Mr. Mackey had lunch with the minister. There's an incentive program in the air.
Well, I don't buy it.
He's in for 90,000. The Cormac brothers are in tight with the Saudis. They've been mopping it up all week.
So, as long as this embargo holds...
It's going up, up and away.
Anything else, Mr. Gould?
Yes, I'll have a cup of coffee and a telephone.
Everybody's buying.
I'm afraid I can't agree.
What do you mean? You know something?
I had a small word with Sheikh Yamani's bodyguard at the airport, and...
And what?
Now, this one has to be kept strictly between you and me.
STX? Sotex Resources? Never heard of it.
The Sheikh has. And he's about to deliver them a major explorations contract.
This is entirely entre nous. This is just between you and me.
Sotex? Hang on one second. Here it is.
A little stuff called Sotex. Ever heard of it?
Sotex, 10 and a third, get me 20,000 shares.
Mines, natural resources, stuff from up north, you know. But listen, the Sheikh Romani is very interested in this company.
The TSE dropped 40 points as a result of this morning's announcement, and the Dow fell back an alarming 72 points. One of the few bright spots in the midst of this doom and gloom was a tiny company called Sotex Resources, which closed at 15.3.
10 1/4? Well, ditch it for Christ's sake. What are you waiting for?
Yeah, Holly, unfortunately, we're looking at a bit of a dip. Down 12 points. Well, that's the way the game works. You know the risk. Sotex? Sure, you want a piece?
Look, sir, what do you want me to say? You lost, I lost, everybody lost. Take it up with OPEC.
Whatever you say, Glenn. You know, I have to confess, you were my only client who made a buck last week, and a pretty good one, too. Hey, listen, you gave up touring. Maybe you should give up playing the piano altogether and just play the market. That's right, a virtuoso. Yeah, I'll talk to you soon. Piano player.
Wanted. Friendly, companionably reclusive, socially unacceptable, alcoholically abstemious, tirelessly talkative, zealously unzealous, spiritually intense, minimally turquoise, maximally ecstatic loon seeks moth or moths with similar equalities for purposes of telephonic seduction. Tristanesque trip-taking, Tristanesque trip-taking and permanent flame fluttering. No photos required, financial status immaterial, all ages and non-competitive vocations considered. Applicants should furnish cassettes of sample conversation, notarized certification of marital disinclination, references re low decibel vocal consistency, itinerary and sample receipts from previous successfully completed out-of-town moth flights. All submissions treated confidentially. No pause need apply. The auditions for all promising candidates will be conducted to and on Anaton Penisand, Newfoundland.
Valium, a minor tranquilizer used to relieve symptoms of tension and anxiety.
Avoid using this medication in conjunction with antidepressants. Trifluoperazine, an antipsychotic prescribed for moderate to severe depression and anxiety. This medication may cause an inability to sleep. Do not take in conjunction with barbiturates. Like other barbiturates, pentobarbital acts by interfering with nerve impulses to the brain. Long-term use may result in addiction. Side effects include drowsiness, lethargy, and a general allergic reaction. Librax is most commonly used to soothe the anxiety often associated with gastrointestinal disorders. The effects of Librax may be inhibited by certain medications used in the treatment of high blood pressure. Aldomet is used to control high blood pressure. A mild sedative effect or transient headache are possible side effects. Aldomet will increase the effectiveness of other antihypertensives. Clonidine acts in the brain by causing the dilation of certain blood vessels. Side effects include drowsiness, dizziness, headache, and fatigue. Indocin, a non-steroidal agent used to treat various forms of joint and muscle inflammation. It can produce severe stomach upsets, rashes, itching, and even a ringing in the ears. Hydrochlorothiazide, an antihypertensive used in the treatment of high blood pressure. Side effects include headache, restlessness, and a depressed sex drive. Septra, an anti-infective used to treat infections of the urinary tract, may cause itching, rashes, drug fever, or arthritis-like pain. Fiorinol, a non-narcotic pain reliever, can lead to drug dependence or addiction. Interaction with phenylbutazone may cause stomach irritation. Phenylbutazone, an anti-inflammatory often used to treat pain in the shoulder due to bursitis. Prolonged use may lead to excessive water retention. Chlorothiazide, a diuretic used in the treatment of high blood pressure or in situations where it is necessary to rid the body of excess water. Avoid using in conjunction with drugs that have a stimulant effect. Allopurinol, an anti-gout medication. A major side effect is exhaustion and a desire to sleep. Avoid tasks that require concentration.
He didn't talk to me about drugs very much, except these instances when he would excuse himself. And then it was interesting. Of course, there was a bathroom in this hotel suite, and I asked him if I could use the bathroom. And these sessions went on for 6 and 7 hours. And so I remember going in there and seeing lined up on the wall all of these different bottles. And I came out and I said, Glenn, surely you're not taking all this stuff, are you? And he said, well, no, not all at once, and sort of laughed. I don't understand that in him. I never understood that in him. And I didn't have a feeling that he was acting in a way that had been produced by a drug. He was neither speeding, nor was he sort of, not in control of any kinds of anything. And here was this lineup of bottles.
Mr. Gould, we've covered a lot of the topics that I wanted to cover with you, but could we perhaps move on to some of the more personal questions? Tell me, do you believe in the supernatural or in ESP?
You know, no one's ever asked me that before. Do I believe in the supernatural? Of course, yes. And no. That is to say, I don't hold this notion that one's mind can be read like a book or some such thing, but that there are certain inexplicable coincidences in the world seems to me patently obvious.
Have you ever experienced any one of those coincidences? Could you tell me about it?
Yes, several times. The oddest being when I was very young, 9 years old. I should preface this by saying that I've always been fascinated by dreams and the kind of feeling that they leave one with. It's a certain horrible feeling, a tragic sense of loss that one can derive only from a dream. Anyway, at this time, I was about 9 years old. Pardon me. About 9 years old, and I had this peculiar dream in which I saw myself covered with red spots. The next morning, when I mentioned it to my mother, she'd had exactly the same dream. Now, at that time, there was no hint of measles, no epidemic, no worry of any kind. So the dream certainly couldn't have been affected by any external common suggestion. And yet, 4 days later, I got the measles.
Very interesting. Tell me, continuing, what do you believe regarding afterlife?
Well, I was brought up a Presbyterian, though I stopped being a churchgoer at about 18. I've always felt tremendously strongly that there is indeed a hereafter with which we must all reckon, in light of which we must live our lives, and there is that inevitability of the transformation of the spirit. As a consequence, I find all here and now philosophies quite repellent, lax, if you will. I realize, however, that there's a great temptation to formulate a comfortable theory about eternal life so as to reconcile oneself to the inevitability of death. But I'd like to think that's not what I'm doing. I don't believe I'm trying to create for myself a deliberate, self-reassuring process. It just seems intuitively right. I've never had to work very hard at convincing myself of the hereafter. After all, don't you think, it seems infinitely more plausible than its opposite, oblivion. Hello, Jesse. It's me. I wonder, could you indulge me for a moment? I'm in a bit of a state. Well, I was driving along when I suddenly remembered that story about Schoenberg. Schoenberg. Remember, he was obsessed with numerology, numbers and so forth. So much so that when he turned 65, he was terrified that he was going to die because his age was divisible by 13. So he consulted an astrologer friend who assured him that he would survive until the next time the numbers conspired against him. Well, great, he thought. Another 13 years, I'll be fine till I'm 78. Well, 11 years later, however, when he was 76, the astrologer wrote back to warn him that it's not only numbers that are divisible by 13 that he ought to watch out for, but also those whose digits add up to 13. For example, 76. Needless to say, he was petrified, but not for long. 3 months later, he died, July 13th, 1951. I can't help it. I'm 49 tomorrow, and Schoenberg's still talking to me. Jesse? Jesse, you there?
The week before he died, I remember it in great detail. And it's funny that, it's peculiar that I do remember it in such detail, because many of the times our conversations were light and just banter between two good friends. But that week before Glenn died, everything was serious. He couldn't control the birthday that was coming up, the celebration. He seemed to think everything was slipping away from his control. And he was obsessed with this feeling that he wondered, would people recognize him and come to a funeral? And we'd never talked about anything like that before. But he said that he wanted, he would like to be like Huckleberry Finn and come to his own funeral, because he didn't think that there would be people who came. He didn't think that the world loved him like they did. And he knew about how the records were selling. He knew that they were very, that Japanese people bought a lot of them, that people in Central Europe and in Asia bought a lot of them. But he just didn't think that he was that important. And it never surfaced that, to me at least, that he felt his own fame. His humility was beyond everything. And when I saw the people pour into the St. Paul's Cathedral, I couldn't help but believe, oh, Glenn, you were wrong for probably the first time in your life, you know, because he always liked to think he never was wrong.
Jesse, it's me. I was just out driving along, and guess what came on the radio? Here. Well, yes, sure, it's one of the French suites, but which one? And there you have it. Johann Sebastian Bach, the Saraband from French Suite No. 1, performed with the unmistakable genius of the young Glenn Gould. Tragically, Mr. Gould passed away this morning at the age of 50. He died in hospital in Toronto after suffering a stroke last week. Since that time, he had been on a life support system and never regained consciousness. In the fall of 1977, the U.S. government sent 2 ships, Voyagers 1 and 2, into space, where they are eventually destined to reach the edge of our galaxy. In the hope that someone, somewhere, would intercept these craft, a variety of messages were placed on board that would be capable of communicating the existence of an intelligent creature living on a planet called Earth. Among these was included a short prelude by Johann Sebastian Bach, as performed by Glenn Gould. Voyagers 1 and 2 left our solar system respectively in 1987 and 1989.